Well, it's that time again for the MSR workshop, and we have got another tool review. And boy, it's going to be a big one. So stick around. So the big day has arrived, and this bandsaw comes in a crate, which is more just to kind of protect the saw than actual for structural rigidity. Now, unfortunately, the saw was so tall that I couldn't fit it through my garage door the normal way, so I went and got a furniture dolly and kind of put a rubber mat behind it so I could tip the saw back and get it through the door. Now I tried this once, and as you can see, we can barely even tip it back. It's so heavy. So I took the table off, and then I had to take the upper wheel off just to lighten it enough. And still, basically, with the two of us, we could barely get it through our garage door. I know it's in fast motion there, but we were really struggling. I was worried we were going to drop the thing. So here it is in my garage, and you can see in the background my previous Rikon saw. While it was a great saw, I was super excited to get this big boy here. Now the saw does come bolted to a pallet, and we left it bolted to the pallet because it made it a really stable platform to tip it back on and get the dolly underneath to keep it from rocking back and forth. Now the mobile base that I chose to use here was the Bora heavy duty mobile base. Now there's two versions of this one that's a little bit lower to the ground, and then there's a higher one. I chose the lower one just to keep it from, adding a little bit more height to the saw because it's already tall enough. So the way I did this is you put one side together, and then you can tip the saw. And as you can see, I put the back of the saw on a mat, and that just keeps it from scooting around on my concrete floor. Concrete floors can kind of get slippery with dust and stuff on them. So here's a quick shot of me wiring up the saw, and I don't remember what gauge wire, but it's the biggest I could fit. So I took this end here because the saw doesn't come wired. I took the end with me to the hardware store and found the biggest wire that I could fit in there. Now there was a smaller wire, but it was a little bit smaller than I wanted. So found a really big wire and actually had to trim just a little bit of the plastic off the end to get to fit far enough through that nut to work. And the beauty about wiring 220 is that you've got three wires. You've got two hot wires and a ground. So really, and it doesn't have to be hooked up a specific way. Here's some shots of the saw next to the other saw. And I wished I got a shot of the rears of the saw just to show you how big this saw was. So if any of you have watched my last video, I did a review on the Rikon 18-inch bandsaw, and while it was a great saw, I'd been considering getting another one. If you haven't watched that video, I suggest stopping there first, just so you can see that saw, so you really can appreciate what I'm going to show you here in just a second. But in that consideration, when I was looking to get a new saw, I'd wanted something with substantially larger motor because I do a lot of resawing, cutting my own veneers and stuff. And if you've ever done that, you know that it does take a quite powerful motor to saw big stuff. I mean, you can do it on smaller saws, but it's going to take you quite a lot longer. And if you end up pushing too hard, you can stall the motor out. And I had done that on occasion with the other saw. So I had done a big search and came up with this Powermatic. This is the Powermatic 1800b. This is their 18-inch saw. And so we're going to go through it today to show you why I chose this saw. And just giving you a sneak peek, I'm going to be doing a future video, which should probably be the next video that I release. And it might be a little bit of a controversial one, but I think you guys will like it. And I'm going to be comparing probably the best large format bandsaws that are out there. And I don't know of any YouTube videos that have done that yet, because if you do an internet search for best bandsaw, you're going to get a bunch of small stuff. You're going to get like the Win bandsaw that's like a 10-inch bandsaw that's sold on Amazon, and you're going to get a bunch of small saw. And I suppose saying the best saw is this very subjective thing, but I want to know what is the best big bandsaw that you can get. You know, if you had almost, I don't want to say an unlimited budget, but you know, if you had a budget to a certain amount, that next video is going to delve into that. It's going to go through, hopefully very methodically, all the features of these large format saws to help you make an educated and informed choice when upgrading your saw for your shop. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about this guy right here. So come on, let's talk about this saw and show you what it can do. All right, jumping right in, let's go over some of the features. I wrote some of them down so I could be as exact as I could because I couldn't remember. So the thing is, almost 83 inches tall. This thing is huge. It was big enough that I couldn't fit it through my garage door, and you'll see in that video what we had to do to get it through the door. Big saw. And of course, it weighs 900 pounds. Actually, I think it weighs slightly more than 900 pounds, and the shipping weight was about 923, 930 pounds, so crazy heavy. We have got a 5 horsepower 22 amp motor. So very, very large motor. It's probably the biggest that I've got in my shop here. I have another tool with a 5 horse motor, but I don't think it's quite as large as this 5 horse motor. 22 amps, so you want to make sure that you've got a big breaker if you decide to purchase this saw. Table size. We've got a 24-inch deep by 27-inch wide, so a huge stable platform. The casting on this is around 2 inches thick, and the actual steel that's used, the cast iron that's used on this, is around 1/4 of an inch thick. So very, very heavy, solid surface. It's not moving on you. So next, this thing is, so it's 39 inches deep. So that's from the edge here to the back of that post. And this column here, which is what part gives the structural rigidity on this saw, is 8 inches thick. That doesn't sound like much, but go measure any other bandsaw out there and you're going to realize that the thickness of this column here is almost double that of any other saw on the market. Everything about the saw is just substantial overkill, and overkill in a good way. I'm not complaining one bit. I mean, the knobs, the handles, everything is metal. You will be hard-pressed to really find any plastic on this entire saw. On the thickness of this saw at the top, so the widest part of the door and this upper housing here is going to be about 10.5 inches, so very, very large. Just giving you an idea of the beefiness and the mass of this saw, just this fence assembly here alone weighs almost 22 pounds. So crazy heavy. It's basically a table saw fence that has been mated to a bandsaw. It works incredibly well, slides incredibly smooth, very, very accurate. It's adjustable in every which way direction, so very nice. And one of the big things that's very important with a saw of this size is what size can you cut for height and width. So obviously 18-inch saw means from the blade to the back post that you're going to be able to cut 18 inches wide. But more importantly, what I bought it for is the 18-inch resaw capacity. We've got crazy amount of distance here that you can cut some huge stuff. And that 5 horsepower motor really helps when you're cutting something that tall and that size. So next I'm going to bring you in a little bit closer and we're going to talk about the trunnions of the saw, because if you have a big table and the trunnions are what supports the table are wimpy, the table is still going to move and flex a little bit. So you want to look at the trunnions. That's one thing that saw reviewers really don't talk enough about, and that needs to be really well built, even overbuilt, because that helps support whatever you're putting on top. So come on here, let's talk about those. All right, this is a view from underside of the table. And first talking about the trunnions here. So may not look like it in the pictures here, but they are very, very substantial. The thickness right here on this casting is the solid part, and that is 3/4 of an inch thick cast iron. These are over an inch thick here, so very large, supported by 4 bolts underneath to support this massive table, which probably weighs over 100 pounds. Then you've got a rack and pinion gear set over here, and this I believe is steel, and that is 1/4 of an inch thick. And to adjust the table, you have a very large hand wheel and then a locking part right here to keep the table from moving, and we'll adjust that just a second. Flipping this guy over here, this is our blade guard, but it also helps with dust collection because you have a large port right here to allow air and dust to go through. And then this just helps seal it off so your air loss isn't quite as bad, so you get pretty good suction underneath. Dual bearings, and they're all toolless. Just loosen this guy and then adjust them back and forth to get your blade set right. One of the cool things that Powermatic has done to their saws is they have Carter style rear guides. See if I can get my saw, or excuse me, my thing to focus, where they have a grooved bearing. And it's got two grooves in it, one for really thin little blades, and this will take to as small as an 1/8 inch blade. And then you can run it and do like scroll work and stuff on the saw. Even a big saw like this, you can do that. And then the larger groove is for running, you know, the really large blades. And you're still setting this up like you would a typical saw. If you're following the Snodgrass method, where your blade is just almost touching, but if you do any pressure like this, it will touch the back of the wheel. So you're not running it actually in the groove. Starting off here at the lower part of the saw, and one of the important things is our bearings. And we have dual huge 70mm bearings. And the center of these are huge. So the shaft that supports the cast iron wheel is very large. Dust port with a zero clearance replaceable block at an angle, and then all your dust will collect and shoot down there, as well as a ramp, which is nice, that keeps the bottom of the saw clean, that directs all the chips to the dual 4-inch ports, one there and one there. And then also this is enclosed, which is a really nice feature. If you notice on my Rikon saw, I built a cap for the inside of the saw. Well, they've got this built in, so when this is up against this part here, it encloses that. As far as I know, this is the only saw that is like this. Now, the Jet saws may include this piece over here because Jet and Powermatic are owned by the same company, and they have a lot of the same design features. One thing that I'll talk about while I'm down here is the doors top and bottom. This is the only saw that I know of as well, because I went and looked, that the doors only have to come to a 45-degree for you to get band off. That makes it so you can push it up against the wall, because all the other saws out there, you have to open the doors almost 90 degrees. And that is because they've got the hinge mounted to the side of the door instead of to the face. So you can see right here, these doors are coming out a little bit, and then you've got your hinge mounted down here. And so that makes it so you only have to open the door 45 degrees to get them open and access to remove the blade. So huge thing, makes it so you don't have to pull the saw out every time you need to change a blade. So this here is the back side of the saw, obviously. Here's our tension lever gauge, and it's got 3 positions. One way is completely detensioned, so you can take your blade off. This is under partial tension. And when you pull it up this way, it's under full tension, and now the saw will operate. If it's under partial tension or detensioned, there is a switch that will not allow the saw to go, which is cool. Also, if the doors are open, so a lot of safety features to prevent you from hurting yourself. All the knobs are chromed and beautiful. Door latches are all chromed. You've got your lock for your blade guard raising and lowering, as well as your tracking knob chromed. This guy is not plastic either, it's steel. You've got a marking gauge. And no, those aren't scratches. There's actually a plastic protective cover over that I just haven't peeled off, because it's still new and I really haven't cut much on it. Dual 4-inch dust ports down below. and then a huge hand wheel to tilt the table, and it's very effortless to adjust this. Our motor is on a very, very large, flat, multi-ribbed belt. And something you'll notice in paying attention to your saws is what type of belt they use. A lot of the newer saws are sort of starting to go into the flat belts, but even the Lagunas and the higher end ones, you'll notice that they still got those old automotive rubber type belts. Some of them even put 2 belts on there. Some of them will just have 1, but if you get a big 5 horsepower motor and you have a single belt that's a thin belt, you might run into problems with it slipping or not working as good as you want. And those old belts tend to have a memory if you leave them sit for a while. So it's really nice that they're starting to put more modern belts on some of these saws. Now this saw did not come wired. And so the nice thing about that is you can get whatever length of cord that you want. So I got a 15-foot, really, really heavy duty gauge cord. So jumping up top here, we have dual 35 millimeter bearings with a spacer in between. So you can go as small as an 1/8 inch blade or run as large as an 1.5 inches. And it takes a 160-inch blade as well. Now there are 2 models of this saw. There's the 1800 and the 1800b. The 1800 was the previous model. I don't think it's available anymore. The difference is where the blade tensioning gauge is. It's on the inside, and they have since put a window here. And so the B model is just the updated model. One of the things that really impressed me about the saw, I mean, there's so many things, is how big the spring on the inside is, as well as the way these put tension on it. There's 2 massive columns here and a really, really fancy spring. So now that we've gone through the saw, let's do some cutting. I've got a 3/4 inch wood slicer blade on it. This blade is specifically meant for doing resawing. So we're going to do some resawing, and we're going to see if we can get a nice thin veneer that's real even and consistent and smooth. So one of the first things you're going to want to do when you're resawing a piece of wood for veneer and to get it to look good is to prepare your blank. You need 2 good flat sides. You need a flat bottom and a flat side. These are going to reference off the table and your fence. So come on, let's see what we can do. Before I get started on this resaw of this board, I want to talk about this surface that I've got on here. Some of you are probably wondering what it is. Well, it's a magnetic tool top saver. And I just cut it to the size of my saw. I got this off of Amazon, and I'll throw a link up in the description below. But it makes it really nice that I don't have to worry about getting rust on my new table. Also, that actually is a pretty slick surface, so I've just left it on, and I found it works pretty good just leaving it on all the time. I may take it off, I may leave it on. We'll just kind of see how it performs. But yep, that's what it is. Let's get to cutting. Let's talk about what I've got. I did two pieces, one about as thin as I could go, and we are measuring at 0.04 of an inch, or 3/64. Let's check the other side. Or 32nd there, 32nd there, and a 64th there. 32nd, 32nd, and 64th there. Sixty-fourth, 64th, and 64th. So pretty darn consistent. I don't think you could probably get it much more accurate than that. And the surface, you know, looks pretty darn good. I mean, the wood is so thin that, you know, you can flex it. I would almost be inclined to leave this a little bit thicker, and then say if you have a drum sander, you could run it through a drum sander, and then it would get rid of all this, and you would have a veneer that's perfect on both sides. Now this is our finished side, but I think that did pretty darn good. Second piece was a piece that I pushed through really fast just to kind of see. So 13/64 there, 3/16, 3/16. Let's try the other side. And 13/64, 13/64, and 13/64. So pretty darn good for that as well. But I say one or two passes through the drum sander, and you're going to have this perfect. Well, this saw performed exactly how I would expect and hope a saw of this quality to perform. It did exactly like I thought. And I am 100% happy with the purchase that I made, and I do recommend this saw if somebody is looking to get a large format, very, very high quality, heavy duty bandsaw for resawing, for bowl blanks, and even small stuff, because you can put a 1/8 inch blade on this. Now in my next video, there is something that I need to talk about on this saw. There is a fix that I have to make. I wish I could tell you about it all now, but it's going to require a video to do, so stick around for that next video. Also, in a future video, I'm going to be talking about Resaw bandsaw blades. This is the wood slicer from Highland Woodworking, and I was very happy with the way it performed, but I want to compare it to the Timberwolf blade, and specifically their Resaw blade, and it's going to be a bimetal blade. It's going to be a little bit more of aggressive tooth, and it's a thicker kerf, so I would expect that I would get a little bit rougher of a cut. But we want to do a side-by-side comparison because I don't think there's any videos out there that compare the two blades. I hope you guys liked the video. If there's anything that I left out, be sure and put them in the comments below, and smash that like and subscribe button, and stick around for that next video. Thanks, guys.